Are you considering divorce? Are you dealing with it now? Are you on the other side and not sure what comes next? You've come to the right place. Welcome to the Divorce Do's and Don'ts Show with your host, Lisa C. Decker.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm Lisa C. Decker, your host, and I am a certified divorce financial analyst and real estate collaboration specialist in divorce, as well as the CEO and founder of Divorce Money Matters and DivorceTown USA, the sponsor that brings you this show. I am happy that you're with us today. We are going to have a wonderful show with an expert in divorce and grief. And this is something that doesn't get talked about enough. So we know that the holidays can bring additional angst to divorcing couples and intensify the grief that you may already be coping with. Our guest today is Yvonne Heath, and she's here to help us navigate grief through divorce. Yvonne has been a registered nurse since 1988 in many areas, including emergency, chemotherapy, and hospice. This woman understands people dealing with grief. She became disheartened by our society's reluctance to talk about pain and prepare for grief, causing excessive suffering. And she suffered too, not knowing how to do it differently. And then in 2015, Yvonne, and you can come on camera, Yvonne, she blazed a new trail to create social change, and today she will share some of her insights with us. So welcome to the show, Yvonne. I'm so happy that you're here with us today, and I know you're also a fellow win-win host. So that is the network that we both broadcast our shows on. So we're happy to have you here today. So tell us a little bit about how grief and divorce differ from other types of grief, and what exactly are people grieving in this situation?
I have to be very mindful of how much time we have, because we could talk about this for 3 days straight and still not talk about it all. You know what? I'm gonna quote a line from a movie. If anyone's ever seen the movie P.S. I Love You, where this woman, I don't want to spoil it for people, but this woman's husband dies and she's just so beside herself. And, she's like butting heads with her mom, who is divorced. And she says to her mom, well, at least we should try never to at least people. At least he didn't die. And the mother said, no, he chose to leave me. Right. And I just thought that was so profound, because when there is a death, right, there's a finality, and you grieve, and people support you. So just, they're bringing meals, they're helping in any way they can. And when there's a divorce, either you chose to leave. I mean, no one would choose to get married and then divorced. That's not on your vision board. If you are choosing to divorce, then you've been through so much that you didn't have another choice, or this person is choosing to leave you, and suddenly you find yourself, it's so isolating, right? And you want to be, many people have children, of course, you want to be strong for your kids, and there's so many layers. How am I going to make it financially? And you're losing family members. There's the obvious losses, right? Your relationship, financial, all the things, maybe you're moving. And then all the relatives that maybe you loved on that side of the family, friends that were friends as couples. There's so many secondary losses that we don't acknowledge. But the big thing is we don't know how to really support people when they've divorced. They just, because we forget and life moves on, and you divorce, oh, that was a couple of years ago. Grief doesn't just last, right? There isn't a timeline for grief. So it's multifaceted, and it's so unique for everyone, right? I think the most important thing is to not compare, not judge, and really listen to how it's affecting that person.
And that really applies to all kinds of grief as well. But yes, there are some definite unique circumstances with divorce. As you say, you don't have that support network of people coming out and just, wrapping you in love and sympathy and comforts that they bring to you. A lot of times people who get divorced are kind of left to their own devices. So you have to create that network for yourself.
Absolutely.
So what about the old saying, I have to be strong for? Let's talk about that and other misnomers.
Oh my goodness. It's so interesting because, sorry, women, I am going to be a little tough love here. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, because we've all heard it. We've all said it, oh, my family couldn't survive without me, or I'm the glue that, holds everyone together. And it feels good, right? We kind of feel pretty good about that. And here's the thing. When we think that we're going to carry it and we need to be strong for everyone, that is heavy. Because the truth is, even in grief, and wow, Lisa, you certainly know about grief, you're divorced, it doesn't mean the other things aren't going to happen also. Maybe a parent dies, you're taking care, you're a caregiver, your child, something happens to one of your children. The rest of life keeps going and it's messy. And there are, when I talk about death, the D word that no one wants to say, like the big deaths are people dying, the big, people or pets, because some people love their pets more than they love people. And the little deaths that, go on. And yet, okay, I'm going to laugh at myself right now. What was my point? What was your question? I got
the misnomers.
Thank you. The misnomers. So
because I do that too.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And I'm just very honest with my human messiness and flaws. So that whole, let's be strong for, how about we, instead of being strong for, we grieve with? How about we are learning, unlearning, and evolving together? Right? Like, first of all, like I talk about the fact that we're ill prepared for grief, transitions, end of life. And that's where I think, talking about planning before grief arrives, and grief is whatever makes your heart ache. Yes, the death of loved ones and divorce, diagnosis, job loss, moving, even in good transitions, even if you chose to divorce because you had no other choice, there's tremendous grief in that. How about saying, I am a hot mess right now. I'm feeling all these emotions. I feel like that is the greatest way to teach our children and others we love. Teach by example. Wow, mom doesn't have it all together and she's okay to cry. Grief demands to be heard and felt. And that's mourning, right? That external expression, which we're very uncomfortable with. Oh my gosh, what if I make someone cry? I think, great. Wonderful. They're letting it out.
I couldn't agree more on that. I will say, as a person who has been through a tremendous amount of grief, and we talked about that before the show, early on, I decided I wasn't going to hide anything. I was just going to go through the journey and, found the good days and the bad days. And there were moments, I made a joke of this, but it really was an intense moment for me that I was in a grocery store after my husband passed away. And I heard a song that just hit me like in the gut, a song that I knew was very intense meaning to us. And I remember just sitting down and putting my butt on the side of the cheese aisle and holding onto the cart and crying and crying and crying. And there were people all around, and I just didn't care. I just needed to release that in that moment. And I got up and I brushed myself off and I kept going, but it felt good to let it go. The point is that you're making and I'm making here is don't try to be strong and hold it all in. You need to let those emotions flow. Otherwise, they're going to back up and come back at you, and in physical ways and other things.
They demand to be heard. And you're right, Lisa, they will appear mentally, physically, emotionally, some way. And, it like crying, I think it's wonderful that you're crying in the cheese with the cheese. And I always say, bring heart and humor into it. Heart, humor, and humanness. And acknowledge and allow your feelings. And sometimes when you're grieving, we don't talk about this stuff before. That's my whole thing. Let's talk about before. That's my program. Get ready for grief. Let's be proactive. Grief can just show up as fogginess. You can't focus. You're so irritated by the dog that you used to love. If that dog doesn't get out of your face, like you just irritable. What is wrong with me? And if we just sit with it instead of trying to shake it off and I've got to allow it. You know, your emotions are like a toddler having a tantrum. Go ahead and try. I dare you to try to stop it. Just allow it, and then you'll be, whew, I feel better.
Yeah, it does help. I remember I posted a lot about my grief journey through it on Facebook. I never intended to really write a book through Facebook, but it's in the works. But I had one woman who responded, and she said, I've never allowed myself to grieve my father's death. And she still can't look at his picture 10 years later. Can't open a photo album. And, you know, people were saying, let me come over and sit with you and let's look at it together. And she was so locked down and was like, no, I can't face that. And can you imagine living with that for all that time and how hard that must be? So I'm a big proponent of, you know, doing what your body, what your mind, what your emotions need, and getting support behind it, whether it's a coach or a therapist or, you know, a certain group of friends. But let's talk more about the timelines, you know, these misnomers of people saying that there's 5 stages of grief, and I've heard 7, and timelines that they associate with that. And I know you say it's a myth. So tell me what your take is on that.
So let me just tell you, first of all, one of my favorite things I love to think of is the fact that you never know what awaits on the other side of grief, right? When I got married, and I had my rose-colored glasses on and everything was so wonderful. I lived in Corpus Christi, Texas. I was a traveling nurse. And I remember calling my mom and saying, you know, you might as well accept that I will never live where there's snow again. Ha, ha, ha. Because at 8 months pregnant, I realized that I'd married an alcoholic. I worked a lot of nights, so I didn't really, you know, I pretended I couldn't see. And also I worked a lot of nights. So in that moment, I thought, wow, this is going to be challenging. So I ended up moving to Lockport, New York, staying with my family. And then at age 31 with my 2.5-year-old, I moved home here where I am now in Huntsville, Ontario, with my parents who did not really get along, who divorced years later. and I was like, this was not on my vision board, you know, at age 31. And so in that very dark time, I could have never imagined, here I am. That was in 2016. And I was trying to figure out where I was going to go. And I ended up working at the hospital, and I met this cute paramedic that was very much younger than me. So it was not going to mean anything. We were just flirting, and we're still flirting 20 years later. and I realized that in my dark times, people were avoiding me. And when our son went down a dangerous road of drugs and addictions, people were terrified to talk to us. So they avoided us. They didn't know what to do. They didn't know what to say. I worked in chemotherapy. We weren't talking about what really, we were talking around people's issues, right? Like we weren't talking about real stuff. We were treating no matter what. And I just said, are we well prepared for grief? You know, like I looked at like professionals I worked with, and they're like, oh my gosh, no, we're terrible at it. And I said, well, who's teaching, you know, community to prepare for grief and how to navigate it? And everyone's just like, you know, I don't know, go do your job. So that is what I had no choice but to leave my nursing career, wrote my book, Love Your Life to Death. And I could have never in a million years imagined that. And then it led to speaking, my TEDx talk, and a TV. I had an online show before, and in COVID, I ended up being able to have interviews with people like Patch Adams, if anyone's seen the movie Patch with Robin Williams, who lives in my heart forever, who brings heart and humor to everything, and, you know, laughs at himself, laughs, and it's extraordinary. And I also had the opportunity to interview Ken Ross, and we've become good friends. And Ken Ross is Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's son. who wrote a book. Yes, I know. It's like, are you kidding me? She wrote a book called On Death and Dying in the 60s. And she talked about these stages of grief, which were her sitting at the bedside of dying people. And these were her observations. And she wrote these stages to just kind of help us to see that it's context and people like go through a lot. But the world went crazy with these stages. They kidnapped them, they ran away, because we want grief to be neat and tidy and predictable, and we want a timeline. Elizabeth wrote 24 books. She never mentioned stages again. Nobody talks about that. I thought I talked the stages of grief, etc. And so when people get stuck, they think, well, why am I stuck in this stage of anger? And they're upset with themselves and they're not moving forward. And it's like, that's so adorable. It doesn't work that way. And I had this graph, and I showed you before. This is very shiny, so I want to make sure if you can see that. You know, it says stages of grief, and there's other things like, you know, you go through denial, and you might go through these things, denial, and then maybe bargaining, and then depression and acceptance, and all kinds of things in between. Well, here's the truth. This is really what grief looks like, right?
Yes.
We are a hot mess. Grief and joy can coexist. We can be great one day, we're a mess the next day. And the beautiful thing is, all we need to do is acknowledge and allow our own grief, acknowledge and allow each other's. And we do not need professionals to love and support us along the way. Tell me what this is like. And I just wanted, before I wanted that woman that you said is still not able to grieve her father. It's so deeply sad, and it's never too late. As Dr. Ellen Wolfeld talks about, catch up mourning, where you go back in time, and much of our grief needs to go back. We didn't grieve and mourn things. We didn't allow it. And as if we can lean into it and say, you know, I was trying to be strong for everyone, and there was so much to do, and I had to make money. I didn't allow myself that time. It's never too late. And just know there are no stages of grief. You can kind of see that you will go, it's like grief and joy is a roller coaster, and you have to hang on through the dips and curves and potholes. And if you're fine one day and not fine the next, that's okay. That's called being human. So I'm actually on the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross Advisory Council now, which is just like the greatest honor. And one of the things they do is support people through grief, death, dying. And you know, I think if we learn about how to accept death in our lives and dying, and understand that grief is a part of this journey we experience throughout, we will have a much better chance when things like divorce comes along, to have coping skills and strategies, and know that we have to feel our feelings. And it sucks sometimes. I'm sorry, it's hard.
Yeah, there's no escaping it. You have to go through it, whatever kind of grief you're dealing with. You have to just go through it to get past it. And it's going to pop back up now and then in the strangest of times and places. You know, my husband's passed 6 years now, and I'm doing so much better than I was initially. And that happens for most people. But there are times that it just washes over me. I'll hear something, I'll see something, you know, just reminders. And I just stand and close my eyes and let it do that. And then I, you know, give gratitude for the time we have together. But let's get back to grief and divorce, because it is a different type of grief. And, you know, the person is not gone. Many times you're still dealing with them in your life, and you're grieving the ideal of what your future would have been, what you had idealized for your life. And that's very different. So how do you apply the work that you do to people who are grieving that kind of loss? It's final in that the divorce has happened, or will happen for those who are not quite there yet. But it isn't final in the fact that that person is still there and they have to deal with them.
Absolutely. And isn't it wonderful when people have stories of a a friendly divorce and they become friends. And that's what I wanted. You know, when I got
Yes.
divorced, that would have been wonderful. We had a son, and he chose to abandon his son. And so when somebody dies, you know, you might feel, well, we always feel guilty. I wish we could just pack guilt away and put it over here, but we have to feel it, right? So of course, when someone dies that you love, I mean, you don't feel guilt and shame for the most part. When you divorce, you have failure and you have guilt. Oh, my son doesn't have a father now. And then, you know, you kind of feel, oh, how long you been married? Well, I'm divorced. Maybe you feel ashamed of that. And there's so many layers. And as much as it is different, it is truly the same thing needs to happen. Acknowledging and allowing your feelings, leaning into creating a new life, and knowing that you never know what awaits on the other side of grief, and holding on to that. How awful I feel right now is temporary. Like change is the only constant. So to be able to hold on to that, this will change too. And even the relationship with your ex, if you can allow yourself the feelings like, oh my gosh, I have to deal with this guy forever, or this woman, or are you kidding me? Like this, there's grief in that. And if he remarries, and if you're sharing, you know, your children, there's grief in that, and allowing that frustration. Also, again, you said it, Lisa, find the people that will support you. And if you are not verbalizing your struggle, here's what I like. People, oh, I don't want to bother them, right? Like, oh, I don't want to, it's none of my business. We have to be able to ask more. How are you doing today? I'm sure this is hard. Be honest. I'm begging you. The whole pretend we're fine thing. Watch my TEDx talk. Let's not pretend we're fine when we're not. It's like, you know what? My kids are with my ex right now and I am falling apart. And I'll say, let's go get some ice cream. And we are watching sad movies all day and I'm going to bawl my eyes out in my pajamas. Allowing it. There is a different grief with that. What I would invite everyone to do is accept also, and this was very big for me because so my son, he's been through a lot, and you know, his journey has been challenging. And I know that has a lot to do with divorce, like his father abandoned him. That doesn't go away. I accept that is his journey. You don't have to like it. You know, when you see your kids and you think, oh, my poor kids are going through this stuff. This is so hard. It's a yes. And this is their journey. This is what they are going through. And they have their own power. I have my own power. And they're going to, whatever they are experiencing, they're going to create something meaningful or good from this. Maybe they'll be an amazing counselor.
Yes. Yes. And, you know, I want to make a point about that point. I, with all of the challenges that I have faced in my life, and for those who have not heard my story, you know, I'm a 2-time breast cancer survivor. I lost 10 people close to me in the last 7 years, including my husband and my sister and my grandchildren's father. And a caretaker to my mother through her cancer journey, and to my grandchildren after their father passed. I understand grief, but what I have found to be the greatest saving grace of it all is what you have on the wall behind you there. And that is gratitude. I call it finding the gifts within, because no matter how bad things are, I have always been able to find something beautiful that came out of it all. And sitting in gratitude can do so much for healing. And I just wanted to share that with folks from my own perspective. We know that grief is a very difficult emotion. And in the beginning, you may not be there yet to look at gratitude, but over time, start to open yourself to the lessons that you learned, that make you who you are now and who you're becoming. All of those things can help you survive the most difficult of times, and then help someone else with what you've learned. And that is the beauty of the challenges that we go through in life, the lessons we learn, and paying it forward to someone else.
That is so extraordinary. That's what Patch Adams says, that grief is his most powerful and extraordinary medicine. And in my life, it saves us, because I name 10 things a day that I'm grateful for. And I will tell you, on those hard days, it's like, 1, I'm awake. I'm still living. 2, I had a great cup of coffee. 3, I had a hot shower. I mean, sometimes I'm grasping, for the grass is so green, it looks nice. And I live in gratitude. And some days I don't feel, I'm immersed even in my sadness. Grief and joy can coexist. And if we can allow the joy and the gratitude and the laughter, even as, and especially as we are grieving, we will be the very best versions of ourselves and the very best example to others. So we need to just show up for ourselves first, and just show up for others, no matter what. You are living proof that you can go through too much. It's too much. What you just talked about is too much. And here you are. So, and that's been the greatest part of my journey, is connecting with people who have lived in the deepest trenches of grief and agony, and kept finding a reason to create a grateful a life that they love. And I'm just in awe. See, now here's another person. And in my grief at age 31, when I got divorced and moved home, I couldn't get hired. My 2.5-year-old was painting his walls with poop because he didn't know what was happening. And I was living with my parents, who divorced later and didn't get along. Life was pretty grim, let me tell you. Yeah. And now
your smile now.
I would have been here.
Right. But it helped you create who you are. It helped lead you to the work that you do now, to the heart that you have for helping others. And that's the point of all of this, folks, is, we can't always control the things that happen to us. We don't choose them many times, but they're there. It's life. It's messy, as you say, Yvonne. And we do get to choose how we react to it and what we do with it. And I will say that, reaching out for help is one of the greatest gifts you can give yourself, because I was one of those. I am strong. I was the foundation of the family. I still am. But I finally learned to say, I can only do this much, and the rest, I will guide you to someone who can help you. Beautiful. Because if you don't, you're going to crash and burn. I've been there too. And that is not a fun place to be. And you're going to become sick and maybe even die. And I've been close to that as well. So what I will say is that, grief is part of life, whether you're grieving the loss of a marriage, the loss of a spouse, someone else that you love, loss of a job. Grief is real. We need to talk about it more. We need to accept it and help others get through it. We need to be kind to ourselves and give ourselves some grace when we're going through these things. For God's sake, it's tough. And reach out to others who can help you, coaches, therapists, shows like this. And Yvonne, why don't you tell the folks about your show? You're also a win-win host.
I love this. My show is called Navigating Grief with Heart and Humor, because, there is humor in all. I look back at all my darkest times and I laugh. It's like, wow, I was just a disaster. and I, in that time, in that hard time, you can't imagine that, you would find humor or things to be grateful for. And so I talk about all things. My greatest thing is for us to become proactive, normalize these conversations throughout life, and just allow heart, humor, and humanness, so we can learn and unlearn and evolve together and support one another through the good times and the not so great. Just show up.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful show, and we've got some resources for folks who are going through the divorce process. So if we could bring those slides up. What you see here is the DivorceTown roadmap, which you can download at DivorceTown USA. It includes an ebook which explains each of the options and helps you understand which is best for you and your family, and outlines other professionals and resources you may need along the way. And we have free articles and videos, and our marketplace features some of our favorite products and services that we've found to help you through the divorce process. And you can find that at divorcetownusa.com. Next up, you'll see at Divorce Money Matters, you can download your free divorce financial fitness kit. And I created this to help you get better organized and take better control of your money matters during your divorce. And it includes a different ebook, a working Excel spreadsheet of all the documents you need to gather if you're going through divorce, and a list of 50 must-ask questions when you're ready to meet with a family law attorney. And at DivorceTown USA, we also sponsor a virtual divorce help and hope support group through meetup.com, which meets once or twice a month on Zoom. Meeting dates and times are always listed, posted on DivorceTown USA in the events section. So check that out, and you're welcome to join us. That is absolutely free and our way of giving back to the public. And next week, I am so excited, folks. This is our 1-year anniversary of the Divorce Do's and Don'ts show, and we hope you've enjoyed these past 12 months with us as much as we've enjoyed sharing them with you. And we're going to recap some of our favorite shows and talk about what we can expect in year 2 coming up. So we look forward to seeing you then. And we hope you found this episode of the Divorce Do's and Don'ts show helpful. We look forward to seeing you next week and every week as we continue improving the way the world divorces, one family at a time.